Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. Today, we're going to analyze Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I call this essay Understanding and Appreciating Emerson's Self-Reliance by yours truly, Jimmy. Did you finish the essay with Jimmy? An hour and 34 minutes? Huh? Wasn't that a long one? But I'll bet you're wondering why it was so long, or why it's called a classic with Jimmy. If you read it, I know some of you gave up on it and came right to this analysis. Shame on you. Go back and read it. Anyway, I had a Zoom meeting with someone recently online that was traveling in China. He was a successful entrepreneur, made his money, and now was traveling with two goals: to build a following on LinkedIn and to play his music, which as yet was unpublished. Those are good goals. The topic of philosophy came up in our discussion, and he said that he had read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, but he couldn't read philosophy. Quote, I just couldn't get into it. The Meditations was easier, but still difficult for me, end quote. It was actually a sad comment. So while he was successful, he didn't have the discipline to tackle difficult subjects, difficult things. Not that he made his money wasn't difficult, I'm sure it was. But the study of yourself, who you are, is the most difficult thing in the world. It's always easier to do things that come easy for us, isn't it? But to study yourself, it's difficult. Another executive I know did the Ironman, or he didn't. It's a long story. But basically, he went in, participated, trained for 2 years for the Ironman, and then stopped. He didn't finish. When we were talking about that, it was very interesting to me that after 2 years, he stopped. You can't stop. If you stop, it's really not a good thing for yourself. You got to finish, even if you finish last. You got to finish. One of Jimmy's laws of life is once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to carry it through. And I would respectfully suggest training all that time and then stopping is pretty fatal to your psyche. So you're probably wondering why Jimmy picked this 1841 classic to read to you, Self-Reliance. And it is American, it's a classic American literature. It really is. But it's pretty boring nowadays, isn't it? Even if you read it with me and I try to make it interesting. It's got long sentences, lots of words which have changed meanings. As time passes, these classics get difficult to read. Why? Well, mainly because people change the meaning of words and so on. But I don't think this was the case with Self-Reliance. If you gave up on reading it with me, you're not reading this analysis probably. Or if you are, if you gave up reading and are reading this analysis, you might go back and read the original essay with me, which I encourage you to do. Or maybe you'll read something else on my website, or not. Some people come here and never come back. Some people come here and stay. Some people come here and dabble. My website is used in many, many, many different ways, which is good. But the important thing, whether you read with Jimmy or not, is to read and then think about it and how what you read relates to your own life. We read to learn how, I've told you this repeatedly. We read classical literature to find out how others led their lives and how to lead our own. Classics are not, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, Harry Potter. They're not even The Lord of the Rings, which is better than Harry Potter, in my opinion. They're fine readings, but classics are different. There's something about a classic that keeps it around, refreshed, penetrating. You can read it over and over and over again and get something new out of it every time. Classical literature transcends the time in which it was written, which is why, no offense, that you won't find Potter or Bilbo Baggins on this website. But you will find essays like Self-Reliance, or you will find the meditations of the famous emperor Marcus Aurelius. Narration. Self-reliance is first-person narration. Emerson is narrating it to us from inside his essay. Unlike literature, an essay is, as Google tells us, quote, an exploration of ideas, end quote, where the author-narrator presents arguments, opinions, thoughts on a topic, often supported by evidence and examples, which Emerson certainly does, doesn't he? The title, Self-Reliance, is the topic, and Emerson starts his essay with 3 quotations. So before we get into the essay, we should look at those quotations, because when people write classical literature, every word means something, and he didn't just put these quotations in there to be a smarty pants. They mean something. So the first one was in Latin. Do you remember it? Nete quadrivarius extra, which means do not seek outside yourself. I translated that for you when we read the essay. And then he puts another quotation before he starts his essay. Quote, man is his own star, and the soul can render an honest and a perfect man. Commands all light, all influence, all fate. Nothing to him falls early or too late. Our acts, our angels are, or good or ill, are fatal shadows that walk by us still. Emerson says this is epilogue to Beaumont and Fletcher's Honest Man's Fortune. Jimmy likes to research, as you probably guessed if you've been reading with me for a while. In fact, I get a lot of emails debating me when I take people outside the story, outside the piece of classical literature that I'm reading, because I always tell you, stay inside the story, stay inside, don't go outside. So when I do go outside for a reason, I get some emails. Why did you do this, Jimmy? Well, like everything else, it depends on your definitions. If I look up what Emerson meant when he put that quotation in there, is that going outside the story? Well, yeah, but it is really with the intent of helping me understand what Emerson is going to write and what we will read. I'm not reading an interpretation of self-reliance, which you can, which this is, and there are many, many, many others. You can write your own. But as the narrator, the author, Emerson is doing that. He's putting these quotes ahead of the essay for some reason, which is actually a good technique and one that Jimmy himself used many times on his papers that he turned into professors at college. For example, I use this quote, every age is fed on illusions, lest man should renounce life early and the human race come to an end. End quote. That was from Joseph Conrad at the beginning of my final paper for my master's degree, Love is Energy, Some Philosophical Implications of Mallory's La Morte d'Arthur. Sounds terrific, right? Maybe we should read King Arthur. Anyway, classical literature is language charged with meaning. Who said that? Send me an email if you know. I said it many times. Which means every word is there for a reason, and that goes for quotes. Well, that's a lot of work, Jimmy, some of you may say. And you might say that, but then understanding yourself, ladies and gentlemen, is a lot of work. And it's not easy. It takes discipline, courage, dedication. Understanding other people is a lot of work. Don't tell me you understand other people, right? How do you understand other people if you can't understand yourself? Marcus Luttrell said, quote, "The real battle is won in the mind. It's won by those who understand that their areas of weakness, who sit and think about it, plotting and planning to improve, attending to detail, and work on their weaknesses and overcome them because they can." Luttrell wrote that in a book called Lone Survivor. You won't find that on this website, but it's a good book to read. And he also said, quote, "I'll outwork anyone. I'll just go on and on until the dust clears. And then I'm usually the only one left standing." End quote. You recall Luttrell was a Navy SEAL, lone survivor. It's a great Afghan story. He was the lone survivor of 4 guys on a mission. But his point is well taken. Discipline, outwork anyone. Don't take the easy way out of getting LinkedIn followers. No offense. If you're going to be the one left standing, you have to have insatiable curiosity. You have to get through this Emerson guy. And if you read the essay with me and read this analysis, you're going to figure out why. So when I dove into that quote from Emerson, the one from Beaumont and Fletcher, I found out that those words don't really come from a play, but a poem. Google told me Upon an Honest Man's Fortune is a poem that was first published as a standalone piece and then appended to the play, The Honest Man's Fortune. Therefore, it is a poem and a play. The poem of the same is a separate work, and the blah, 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 blah. Well, that's pretty confusing. Well, how could it be both a play and a poem? Nevertheless, reading that quote deepens Jimmy's appreciation for the essay to come, doesn't it? It should for you. Let's go back and look at it for a minute. Man is his own star. Self-Reliance. Don't forget the title of the essay, Self-Reliance. Man is his own star. And the soul that can render an honest and a perfect man. A lot of talk about the soul in his essay. Got it? All right. Well, it tells me that Emerson must have read the play or the poem, or no, Jimmy isn't suggesting you have to read the play or the poem. There's only so much time. However, knowing it's a play or a poem that he's quoting puts the essay to come in a kind of context to help us understand what Emerson is going to discuss. Self-reliance. Rely on yourself, right? I mean, man is his own star is the essence of self-reliance, according to Emerson, according to anybody. For example, here's some text surrounding the quote that Emerson pulled out. Emerson used the bold that I gave you. So I like to go back and look at originals. The bold is what Emerson used in his quote, and you can read before and after that quote. He that made all the stars you daily read, and from thence filch a knowledge how to feed, hath hid this from you. Your conjectures all are drunken things, not how, but when they fall. So he, God, right? He hid this from you, that you are your own star. And you can read this on your own. That's pretty difficult to understand. But when you widen the quote, when you just take this and look at before and after, and that's one of the things to remember, ladies and gentlemen, context. When people take things out of context, it doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. You got to put it back in context. That's what they mean, put it in context, right? Because if you pull it out as a quote, for example, I just gave you one of Jimmy's laws, right, of nature, of life. Once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to carry it through. I could tell you where that came from. It came from A&P, which is on this website by Jimmy. It's a John Updike short story. You can read the story, and it'll give those words much, much more meaning. But those words, as a law of life, stand on their own. Once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to carry it through. So I suggest you can read AMP on this website, but you don't have to read it to understand what that quote says. This in turn is difficult, even when you widen the quote, but you get the idea. 778 words that might be summed up in 2 lines. Man is his own star, and that soul can be honest is the only perfect man. That makes you wonder why Emerson didn't pick only those 2 lines instead of the whole quote. I think he wanted to put it in his own context. Which brings Jimmy to one of the main points of this analysis: themes. So what's basically what's new, right? There's nothing new under the sun. Have you heard that? This comes from King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Here it is with some surrounding text to give it context. This is from the King James Version. This is the only version of the Bible Jimmy uses. And when we read the Bible on this website, which we eventually will do if we haven't done it already, it will always be the King James Version. Why King James, Jimmy? Well, because that was the first translated from the Latin, right? Or the Greek. All the rivers run into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. All things full of labor, man cannot utter. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it which shall be, and that which is done, that shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. No remembrance of former, neither shall there be remembrance of that are to come, and that shall come after. All things are a-flowing, said sage Heraclitus, right? And that's a lot in that passage, and it's pretty depressing, isn't it, when you read it like that? I mean, nothing new? That's a horrible thought. What about AI, you might say? That's new. Well, AI only tells us what it has accumulated. What about a baby? Baby's new. Well, it comes from a man and a woman, doesn't it? Humans are the ones that put things together. They innovate, not AI. Innovate means changing what is to something else. Like you're changing your bedtime when we change the time twice a year. When you change the time each year, you gain an hour, lose an hour. Right? It's just time, but it's just in our head. There's really nothing new. Time is time. So when you study classical literature with me, you're going to find that there are themes that run throughout literature. Freedom, right? Courage, anti-Semitism. Regardless of the author or narrators we encounter, there's these themes that seem to keep recurring. For example, when we read the Canterbury Tales together, these tales were filled with emotion, adventure, prejudice, good, evil. These ideas travel through literature, including Emerson, who titles his essay Self-Reliance, because that is what he's talking about. Is relying on yourself something new? Think for yourself. People have told you that, right? Well, read some of the pieces on this website and determine the answer for yourself, to yourself. For example, Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, which is on this website, you might enjoy because it's all about self-reliance. Marcus was a Stoic, a philosophy that encouraged you to focus on what you can control, not on things you can't control. Self-reliance. Jimmy is a terrible handyman. He has to call handyman, right? I can't do all this. I'm a klutz. I recognize that weakness. I work at it. I'm better. I get better. but I'm still not a skilled craftsman because I chose to do other things. I have to also say meditations are not only easier to read than Ralph Waldo Emerson, but they're more profound than Emerson's essay. And you're going to say, well, Jimmy, why the hell should I read this then? Well, because it's not a matter of being profound. It's the argument has to make you think. Albert Camus said that. It's not the soundness of the argument. It's that the argument make you think. And the reason this is here is it gives you it teaches you discipline to plow through this guy's words and to find out what the hell is he talking about, just like you have to do with real people. And Emerson was a real person, right? Although fictional characters are sometimes more real, which we'll talk about. What's important to understand is that reading Emerson gives us another point of view about self-reliance, which is a very, very, very important theme. Look, we all rely on other people, right? No man is an island, which we'll talk about when we finish. However, being self-reliant is very, very important, which is what Emerson is trying to tell us. And it takes discipline to pick up an essay like Emerson and penetrate the thinking. Anyway, the third quote doesn't have anything attributed to where it came from. Cast the bantling on the rocks, suckle him with the she-wolf's teat. Withered the hawk and the fox, power and speed be hands and feet. This is not attributed to anybody. But the source of that quote is, in fact, Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance. Why would he give himself credit for what he himself wrote? He wrote a poem called Self-Reliance, not just an essay. He was a big self-reliant guy. Well, if he gave himself credit, that would be self-serving, wouldn't it? Although he is pretty cocky, but he doesn't want to do that. So the lines are part of a longer poem that he published also in 1841. Well, Jimmy, you're going outside the story again. Well, just a little bit, because I want to help you understand what's in this essay. And so far, we haven't even started talking about the essay. We're going to be here a while. We are told by Google and AI that these words are Emerson's own. You understand? A bantling is a small child thrown into the harsh world. Suckle comes from Romulus and Remus, which is a myth about the founders of Rome. You can look that up. Symbolizing independence and power born from adversity. The next line suggests surviving among predators is to grow strong through self-reliance. Right? You can't fight wolves unless you're a wolf yourself. Followed by the final line, where the child has the makings of physical vigor and instinct tools for survival. Now, why did we just spend time on these things before we even start? Is Jimmy contradicting when he tells you to stay inside the story? No, not at all. These three introductions set the stage for the essay, a practice that sometimes is used by classical narrators. For example, in The Fall of the House of Usher, which is on this website, it has this quote before the story starts. Songez le suspens, right? Remember that? If you read it with me, if you didn't read it with me, go read it with me. His heart is a suspended lute. As soon as you touch it, it resonates. If you read the story with me, that describes Roderick Usher perfectly. He's a sensitive guy. It reflects Roderick Usher's sensibilities in this classic story of murder. Murder? Where do you get murder, Jimmy? I read that a long time ago. There's no murder. Read my interpretation. But let's start analyzing Emerson, shall we? Jimmy always tells you the opening word, sentence, paragraph of a piece, any piece, novel, play, classical literature, is always, always, always the most important. Why? Well, it sets the stage for what's to come. So Emerson's self-reliance is no different. Here's the opening again. I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment that they instill is of more value than any thought that they may contain. Remember what I just said about Albert Camus? It's not right the soundness of the argument for that, but let it make you think. This is kind of like that, only he's not saying that it should make you think, it just make you feel, which we're going to talk about a lot here, feelings versus thinking. To believe our own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. If you've been to a school and paid attention, they try to teach us the ways to start an essay. Do you remember? You can use a short, relevant, compelling story that illustrates a point in your essay. This is called an anecdote, kind of like what Emerson used. You can start with a quotation. You can start with a question, a startling fact, a statistic, or a bold statement. And you might even paint a vivid scene with descriptive language. That's how you start essays to get people's interest. He gave you 3 quotes, and then he starts with this series of sentences. He starts out with this statement that he read some verses by a famous painter that were original and not conventional. And the key words in this first sentence are many. See I, it tells us that Emerson is narrating the essay, as he also signed the essay. Comes right out and doesn't make us wait for who's doing the narrating. I read. You see that? Not he read, that's third person. Or he didn't just say, there were some verses written by an eminent painter. He doesn't just say that. He says, I read. Very important. I, self-reliant. Verses tell us it's poetry. Painter tells us it's a painter writing poetry, but an eminent one, right? An eminent adjective, painter. Famous and respected within a particular sphere of profession. So right off, we've got an eminent painter who writes poetry. Original, not conventional. He tells us this is saying Emerson is judging the verses to be not an imitation, not based on or in accordance with what is generally done or perceived. In other words, unique, new. Well, wait a minute, Jimmy, didn't you just say there's nothing new under the sun? I did. But Emerson is saying that these verses that he read are new and unique, which is a pretty packed bunch of sentences, isn't it? Go back and look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sentences. Wow. So the next sentence clarifies the first. The soul always hear an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. In this sentence, Emerson says that the soul hears things. You see that? The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. What lines? The lines that the painter wrote. Let the subject be what it's may. He doesn't tell you what the subject does. He doesn't tell you what the verses are. He's just saying that the soul hears an admonition, right? An admonition. What's an admonition? It's a warning, okay? The soul hears things. A soul is defined as the spiritual, immaterial part of a human being or animal, regarded as immortal. Here's the bad news, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot sense the soul. You cannot feel it, hear it, see it, taste it, smell it. Worse, yes. Some people, they don't believe we have a soul. They don't believe it. That's all BS, Jimmy. I don't know. It's not about what we think. Let me repeat that. I don't really care what you think or what you believe. We're here to study what Emerson believes and thinks. That's why we're reading classical literature. Put your beliefs aside. Put your prejudices aside. Put everything you think about aside and try to understand what this guy is writing and thinking about through his words, right? If you're going to understand it. So in this sentence, Emerson is saying, souls hear. What do they hear? In this case, they hear an admonition, a warning. And that's what the soul hears. A warning about what? What the heck is he talking about? You see, you see why this is difficult and why we're spending so much time now on these first few sentences? To Emerson, it doesn't write. He says the sentiment, the words, and still is more value that these words, the sentiment that the painter's verses instill in us is of more value than any thought they can contain. I want you to think about that. In other words, the feeling that they produce is more important than the content. What? The feeling they produce is more important than the content. What they feel, more important than the content. Did you ever watch an action movie? Have you watched action movies? I'm sure you have, right? The feeling that action movies produce is more important than the actions itself, right? Or is it? In any case, this is called sentimentalism. Sentimental. Or the emotional reaction is more value than the objective meaning or truth of something. 2 and 2 are 4. Do you feel it? Can you feel that? 2 plus 2 are 4. Wow. No, you don't feel anything, right? But there, is it true? It's pretty true, but you don't feel truth, do you? So forget the idea 2 and 2 are 4, just how it makes you feel. There are some people who get off on 2 and 2 are 4, especially if you can turn it into 5. You can't do that. Sentimentalism is a form over function. You've heard that? Form over function. Prioritizes emotional, personal feelings above the work's practical use. A coffee pot. You get emotional about your coffee pot? A French press gives me more emotion than a percolated pot of coffee, right? But it's still coffee. Do you agree with this? Because that is the essence of all these words Emerson uses, that what you feel, ladies and gentlemen, is more important than more meaningful than anything or anyone. Think about this. This is the essence of the essay. What you feel is more important and meaningful than anything or anyone else. It's all about you. And he uses all those words to prove his point. And if you read with Jimmy, did he prove his point? He uses a lot of words to do this. But that's why it's important to read this classic essay, to challenge your own thinking. Of course, there are many of you in the audience, many of you who believe it's absolutely damn true. It's right. He's right. It's all about me. Is it? Is it really? Because if you believe your thoughts are more important than anyone else's in the world, how do you learn anything? How do you learn anything? How do you communicate? How do you live with anybody? Well, then I just rather live with myself. Well, good luck. Besides, where did your thoughts come from? Where do you think your thoughts come from? What makes you so big, right? So important. And are these thoughts that you think you have about you really true? Are they even yours to begin with? Because the essence of all these words that Emerson uses is that what you think is important and more meaningful than anything or anyone is, in fact, you. Is that true? John Locke's blackboard. John Locke was a philosopher who said at birth that your mind is a blank slate. Think about that. Can you think about when you were born way back then? Of course not. Try to do your best. Use your imagination. As you grow up, people write on your blackboard. They start to write on your blackboard. They teach you things, and suddenly it's written on your blackboard. So you think what you think, but that thought, what you think, was put there by someone else, your teacher, your parents, your friends, the books you read, the television programs you watch, the games you play. So the object of thinking is to figure out what was written on your blackboard and whether you want to keep it or not. I want you to think about this. The object of thinking, of self-reliance, of learning about yourself is to figure out what was written on your blackboard and whether you really believe it and want to keep it or throw it away. And even then, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? So what is sentiment? This thing Emerson really says is more important than anything else. Well, it's a view toward a situation or event. It's an opinion. It's a feeling. So like, for example, like pain. You can't describe your pain to another person, and that person can't. They could say, I have pain, but what is pain? Hospitals use scales 1 to 10. How's your pain? 10 being the worst, right? So they give it a numerical value so they can measure it, but they still can't define it. You can certainly feel pain, right? And Emerson is saying what you feel by the things around you is more important than the thing itself. That's what he's saying. And the most important thing is you. 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 This is where I burst into song. Feeling nothing more than feel. Now, I'm not going to sing. Do you remember that song? But you can Google it. I'm not going to give you all the lyrics. But the narrator of that song wishes he never met the girl because the feelings of never having her in his arms again. The word feelings, is used 18 times in that song. And there's only 151 words, so that's 12%. I like numbers. That's 12% of the song's lyrics devoted to feelings. It's a lot. To show you by comparison, I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones is only used 2% of the time, the word satisfaction. And I would argue that's a better song. You can argue differently because it's not about what I think, it's about what you think. Or do we meet in the middle? Emerson is saying that feeling, the attitude that something unconventional instills in us, is more valuable than the content. Do you agree with that? In fact, in the thought they may contain, what Emerson writes, implies that these verses may not even have a thought. Think about this. The thing, it may not even be meaningful. Like, oh, the sunset. You can see a sunset, it has meaningful, but your hand can be just as meaningful to you. The shape of your hand. When I used to teach high school, I would hold out my hand and talk about it for 5 minutes. Put everybody to sleep. That's how I hypnotize. I'm kidding. But as long as they make us feel something, Emerson says that's the point. To believe your own thought, to believe that is what is true for you in your private heart, is true for all men. That is genius. Ladies and gentlemen, this is serious stuff. He uses 10,059 words to prove his points. 10,000 words. I used to work for a guy that'd say, why use 10 words when 100 will do? So the questions you have to ask yourself when you read this with Jimmy is, do you believe what Emerson is telling you? In other words, did he succeed in convincing you about his thesis that feelings are more important than thought itself? Remember this. We read to see how others lead their lives and to learn how to lead our own. And obviously, Emerson has thought a lot about this. Any guy that uses 10,000 words, and yet, what has this got to do with self-reliance? Well, he's trying to teach you that what you feel is how you get self-reliance, that we should trust ourselves, our judgments. Where do judgments come from? When we make a judgment call, where does that come from? Well, it's my gut feel, Jimmy. Do you trust your gut? Do you hesitate? My dad used to say, he who hesitates is lost. It's a certain amount of truth in that. But the rest of the paragraph sets the stage for the entire essay. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost. And our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. He's kind of a weird writer. Would you agree with me? That's why I wrote, what the heck? Inmost and outmost. He's using for the inmost, your inmost feelings. Usually inmost is an adjective, but here he's saying it as a noun. The inmost is due time, in due time becomes the outmost. Latent means not yet developed or hidden. Emerson is telling us to speak our conviction that is hidden and not yet developed. That conviction will be the universal sense, the shared belief or truth. So if you speak what's inside of you, everybody else has to acknowledge how true it is. Is that true? Do you believe that? Whatever you think will be shared by everyone. Excuse me. What is this guy smoking? What do you mean, Jimmy? Did he smoke? You're going outside the story again. I'm kidding. Do you believe that what you think is shared by everyone else? I mean, we project a lot, don't we? When we think what we think. We project and we say, how can people be like that? I'm not like that. Or why I am like that, so I see that other people must be like. You see how confusing this is? And some of you are probably thinking, why even go on? Why should I read stuff like this? Why? Who cares? Well, you should care. So you can sort it all out and figure it all out for yourself. You understand? Because there are people like this. What do you mean? People like Emerson who believe that what they believe, everyone believes or should believe. You should all believe what I believe. Right? Why? Damn it. But that's not only absurd, it's not practical, logical, or realistic. Why? Because we're all different. Now, do we share some common beliefs? Obviously. But going back to Locke's blackboard, why? Someone wrote it on our blackboard. Did we erase it? Did we not erase it? Why doesn't everyone believe in God? There are some who don't. They're called atheists. I know many of them. Why don't they believe in God? They rejected him. They erased it from their blackboard. But everybody should. I do. Why doesn't everybody else? Or the opposite, right? So note the punctuation marks of the semicolon to finish his thought, right? That the inmost becomes the outmost, and the first rendered back to us in the last judgment. What does that mean? Well, when we die, we will know. Let's consider the next group of sentences. Familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton. You know who this is? Who this is? Do you know Moses, Plato, Milton? If not, look them up. Is that he believes that when he writes these down, everybody knows what he's talking about. You understand? And that's part of your journey and why you go outside a story, novel, play, essay like this, is to give it more meaning and more depth so you do understand what Emerson is talking about. Remember, forget what you believe. Well, Jimmy, I don't believe in Moses. I didn't say you have to believe in Moses. Well, I never read Plato. I didn't say you have to read Plato, but you just should know who he is and who John Milton is. Because Emerson obviously does. So if you're going to understand what Emerson says, you got to understand with them. So the highest merit we ascribe to these people is they set at naught books and traditions and spoke not what men, but what they thought. So he's saying these people didn't give a hoot about books or what other people said. They spoke what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, and from more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. So forget what everybody else said. Listen to yourself, which makes perfect sense if you're writing an essay about, right, self-reliance. Now, would you write like this? Would you, if you were going to say this type of thought, would you write it like that? Would you think it like that? Why can't you just say you should listen to yourself rather than books? Well, it's kind of lame, isn't it? This is beautiful language. That's part of Emerson's quote unquote charm. He's a good writer, hard writer to understand these days, but a good writer. So these great writers spoke what they thought. Did they? Stop right there a moment. Did they? Do you know the story of Moses? Do you know? Moses couldn't talk. If you read the story of Moses, God tells Moses what to say. Moses didn't have a thought. He couldn't thought. He wasn't a great thinker. God gave him the words to free the people. Who's Plato? Well, Plato was a student of Socrates. And he wrote many, right? He wrote some great essays, but they came from his being a student of Socrates, etc., etc. We don't live in a vacuum, ladies and gentlemen. We don't. That's why the journey of understanding yourself, what you really think, is the most important journey you'll ever take. We should learn to detect and watch ourselves more than the bards and sages. This is self-reliance. What do I really think? What do I think? The study of yourself, once you start, is called introspection, and it goes on for the rest of your life. The critical part of his thinking, and you should pay attention to see if you agree with him or not. That's why you read this essay. It helps it helps to start your journey of understanding yourself, self-reliance. And it's a delicate balance, isn't it? Between what others think, what we ourselves think. Like I said, do you really think what you think you think? Say that 5 times. Do you really think what you think you think? I'm not going to say it 5 times. He finishes this thought with the powerful sentence. He dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. Is that true? You dismiss without notice your own thoughts because it's yours, just that you don't pay attention to your own thoughts? Well, then when you do get a thought, if you were to dismiss it, how would you act? Think about that. If you get a thought, an original thought or a thought, and then you just dismiss it, do you dismiss your thoughts? Sometimes you do, right? Or it can kill you when you get angry. So you dismiss it. You don't do anything about it. How would you act? Ladies and gentlemen, where do your ideas come from? Do you know? He goes on, in every work of genius, we recognize majesty. Listen to this guy right, huh? Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility, and then most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else, tomorrow, a stranger will say what, with masterly good sense, precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and then we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. So he's saying we have all these wonderful original thoughts, but we dismiss them. We don't pay attention to them. And then suddenly later on, someone comes along and says it. And you realize, I thought that. I thought that. When I was doing my independent study as an undergraduate, I studied under a great Christian brother, and he was writing a thesis on Samuel Beckett. It's a long story. I'll make it short. And anyway, we used to meet because I was writing mine on Dostoevsky. So we would meet a couple of times. And in the final meeting, he showed me his thesis because he was going for his PhD. Very smart guy, really an interesting man. He used to chop trees to for physical for physical exercise, to go out and chop trees. In any case, he showed me what his thesis was on Samuel Beckett, who was an interesting writer. I haven't decided yet if he's going to be on this website, but he wrote a book, many things. One of them was Waiting for Godot. What he did in one called Watt, W-A-T-T. He wrote the story is about actually in words the theory of relativity. It's hard to describe. But anyway, as he was explaining this to me, his eyes were going back and forth like he was reading constantly. It wasn't nervousness. It was just very intense. He was an intense guy. And he looked at me as he read from his thesis, this one sentence or two sentences. And he looked at me and he said, Jim, no one in the world knows this except me and now you. And when he said that, I got goosebumps. I thought, what? What? So he's a very deep thinker, but he had found something that no one else in his mind knew. And he shared it with me. And till this day, it made such an impression that I not only remember it, but I'm not going to tell you. Did anyone else in the universe know that? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe so, but maybe not. There's a lot in this paragraph from Emerson that we recognize majesty. Do you? Do you recognize when something is majestic? Do you learn to see it, or do you learn to see it? Do you recognize it, or is it a growing thing? Is it like wine? Wine, the first time you drink wine, right? It's an acquired taste. These great works teach us to trust our first impressions with inflexibility? Really? But you just told us to ignore other ideas in favor of our own. I'm arguing with Emerson. In fact, he says if you don't say what's on your mind, someone else is going to say it later. So, wow. See how confusing this is? Do you know the story of Facebook? Zuckerberg, remember? He took it and then he was sued by two other students who said they stole his quote original idea. What is an original idea? What is original? What is an original idea? Is there such a thing? What is a work of genius? That's genius. Well, I read classical literature on my website, and I consider every one of these pieces of classical literature great genius. It's beautiful. Are the stories relevant and have they been repeated? Is Hamlet, which is genius, Shakespeare's genius on this website, as other Shakespeare will be on this website if they're not already. Is that genius? That's a story, right? That's a ghost story. It's actually a ghost story, but it's a story about a guy who can't make a decision. Is there examples of that in other places? Yes, but the way Shakespeare put it together, the way he put it together, the way I analyze it with you and give you interpretations that you may not have thought of, which one of which is it's a ghost story. It's a ghost story. It's very important to understand that. Otherwise, the story doesn't make sense at all. And we've all been in a situation where someone says something and we think, I just thought of that. Or why didn't I thought of that a while. In short, Emerson believes genius is the courage to trust your own first thoughts, to believe that the truth you glimpse within yourself is a universal truth, even when the world disagrees with you. Do you agree with that observation that what you think inside yourself is true, universally? It's a fundamentally important question. And there's examples of how these things, when you believe that what is true for you is true for everyone, can go south. Have you heard the name Jim Jones? Have you heard the name Stalin? There's others. These people thought that what they thought is what everybody else should think, and if they didn't think it, they imposed themselves or tricked others to believe what they believed. Do you believe what you believe? In the second paragraph, Emerson continues his proof of concept. True self-education begins when a person stops envying and imitating others and accepts his own nature, discovers through effort that his unique power, given by God, can only be realized by acting faithfully and courageously in his own work, celebrating yourself, self-reliance. The third paragraph has a memorable line. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. What iron string? That's flowery language meaning what? Trust thyself. So Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance, is about that, learning to rely on yourself, to trust yourself, to believe in yourself, to think about, for example, Apple Computer. Those guys, when they came out, they had to trust themselves. Think about anyone who's had a belief that others said, that's impossible. You can't do that. Have you thought? See, and they said, no, 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 I can and I will. And that is why this essay takes you to the extremes of self-belief, rejecting everything outside your own self, which is always, ladies and gentlemen, a danger. Danger, danger. Remember Robbie the Robot? Lost in Space? Danger, danger. There's actually a delicate balance. When you examine ourselves, when we examine ourselves, you quickly realize that your own thoughts, beliefs may not be your own. No one would believe me. How many times have you said that? No one's going to believe me. I can tell you stories now of things that happened to me that you would not believe. You would say, that's impossible. That's BS, Jimmy. Like when I saw an angel. I'm not going to go into it. Besides, what is belief? What does that mean? I believe. You remember Miracle on 34th Street when they're riding in the car going home after the party at the end of the movie? Natalie Wood sitting in the back of the car. I believe, it's silly, but I believe that Santa Claus would bring her that house. And then she says, pull over, pull over. And then she runs to the house. And it's the house that she asked Santa for. I believe, I believe. The golden mean. Aristotle developed the golden mean most clearly in Book 2 of what he wrote, the Nicomachean Ethics. And he lays out his account of virtue as a stable disposition achieved by choosing the middle between excess and deficiency, the middle ground. As a prudent person would describe it, prudent means practical, right? The golden mean is not a side note or passing remark. It's the foundation of Aristotle's ethical system. And it's something to keep in mind your entire life, if you haven't figured it out already. Balance. There's balance in nature? What do you mean, Jimmy? There's hurricanes. Well, that's just the balancing of those good times, right? The good times and the bad times. Courage, for example, is between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity is between wastefulness and stinginess. You understand? The middle ground, the golden mean. It's not being mediocre, but balance. Balance. There's some proteins in your body called lambda and kappa, and they have to be in balance. If they're not in balance, bad things start to happen in your bone marrow. It's a recognition when we become happy focusing on balancing yourself, not going too much one way or the other. So Emerson's essay breaks this rule. Now, whether he does it intentionally or not, I'm not here. I can't tell. I don't know. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm talking about what he does in the essay. He breaks the golden mean. He goes way outside and says everything except what you think sucks. It's not important. You should only do what you believe you should do. He rejects the classical balance. In his essay, he urges the individual to trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to the iron string. And later he says, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. These are not calls for moderation. They're calls for complete self-assertion, regardless of the consequences. Emerson replaces Aristotle's balanced virtue with his own extremism. He's an extremist, ladies and gentlemen. At least in this essay, he is. Let me give a space here. You become the judge, the jury, the executioner. It's all about you. And that's the reason we read this essay. You have to know the consequences of going to the extreme like this. Rather than waking up one day and saying, it's all about me, and start acting like it's all about you, it's better to read and learn in this essay what the consequences of believing something like that will be, rather than acting it out in real life. I hope you understand that. You can still agree completely with Emerson. No one can stop you from believing what you want to believe, right? Jimmy can't stop you. Emerson, in fact, if you want to believe what Emerson says to be at 100%, it's your right, but you're in trouble if you do. Why? Because it's an extremist point of view, which we'll explain. You certainly have to admit that knowing the consequences of your actions ahead of time is a lot better than rolling the dice. Don't you agree with that? Which is why the golden mean is so important. Look, we've all swayed to an extreme one time or another. Would you agree with that? Unless you haven't. If you've lived in a bubble or you're a saint, you've gone to an extreme, right? Even St. Francis, one of my, he's my favorite saint. He was just full of piss and vinegar when he was young, and then he got to be a saint. He's found God, right? He's debauchery, a lot of debauchery when he was a young man, but something happened to him. We get mad at our parents over some trivial thing like being grounded. You're grounded, right? You get mad. You go to extremes, good or bad. They kick in and they take us further away from the balance that Aristotle has been talking about. These extremes, love, anger, those are very powerful emotions. So this piece of classical literature should be studied and thought about, analyzed, so to speak, to determine how far you are willing to go. William Blake, the great English poet, said, "You never know what's enough until you know what's more than enough." You never know what's enough until you know what's more than enough. Does that mean you got to test more than enough all the time to find out what's enough? Not if you read classical literature, because you already know what's enough by reading sometimes when there's more than enough, which in this case is Emerson. There was a play many years ago where a Briton king's son killed the neighboring Norway's king's daughter who was visiting the kingdom in Britain. The son was a little off. The father king of the daughter declared war. The Norway king declared war on Britain, invaded. The British king retreated to a monastery after his son killed the girl, and he was just ashamed. And the scene I remember most was when his men, the British soldiers, came into the monastery and begged the king to come out because the Norway king was invading England and taking over England. And they pleaded with the king and they said, oh, king, please come out. We need your leadership. We need you to lead your men. We're getting slaughtered out there. And until the British king said finally, no, all I know is the girl is dead. And at that moment, the decision not to fight, in my opinion, was remarkable. He was willing to sacrifice his entire kingdom for that one act that his son did. He took the responsibility of saying, no, I will not fight. The son was, nuts. And I think he killed the son or the son died. Anyway. So what does the golden mean to do with this story? Well, extremes are not always bad. What do you mean, Jimmy? You just said they are. They are. But this British king took an extreme stand. He said, I'm not going to rally my troops to save my kingdom because of what my son did. That one moment. Here's another law of life. One moment of weakness and everything is lost. Theory and practice. One moment of weakness. So if you're going to have a view, have a view. Is that reasonable? Decisions on when to leave the golden mean is in your hands. I know a friend, who can't give up liquor, can't give it up. My dad was an alcoholic, and one day I told him, I said, "You mean to tell me the contents of the bottle control your life?" He says, "Yep, one drink and I'm done," because he had gone to dry out, in Dwight, Illinois, for when he fell off the wagon. So in that case, drinking too much, you go, that's not the golden mean. Do you drink in moderation? Do you drink at all? Not being able to drink? Maybe it's your DNA. I don't know. My point is to think things through and then weigh consequences of any decision you make. And since you can only think about what you know at any one time, you know that, right? You can't think about things you don't know about. Doesn't it make sense to read classical literature to teach us how other people lead their lives and how to lead our own? And don't think for a moment that classics are fictional, like, stories and plays. Dostoevsky said about characters, they could be more real than real life itself. How is that possible? Well, because you never know people in real life like you do in classical literature. We don't walk around with glass heads. You can't see in my head. I can't see in your head. But you can read about the depths of people when you read classical literature. You cannot read Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky, who it's really, this is not, I mean, if you read it, it's on this website. If you read it with Jimmy, it's an intense, intense story about a guy who's really screwed up. I mean, he goes right into it. And there are people like that. Or do you think that no one's screwed up? Well, I'm not screwed up, Jimmy. You think? When I read Emerson in college, I thought he was great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with me. Emerson says I'm an individual. My opinion matters, maybe more than my teachers. Emerson gave me extreme confidence. But then as reality set in by going into the real world, guess what? I found I got fired for expressing myself. That other people in power didn't necessarily agree with what I thought. All right. I got fired 3 times, ladies and gentlemen. These are long stories, and I'm not going to waste your time doing it. And that's why I'm telling you, I read Emerson. I thought this guy is right. And he is right in many cases, but not. Yeah. You got to understand that what you think is important, but there's other people who have some good thoughts too. My point is classical literature helps us. So let's finish this analysis of Emerson, and maybe my editor will cut this into a different piece right now, together by reviewing some of the things that Emerson said and discussing them. Review of Emerson's statements. What I'm going to do here in this section is give you the quote from the essay and then talk about it. Give you the quote and then talk about it. So here's the quote. No law can be sacred to me, but that of my nature. Good and bad are names, just names. very readily transferable to this or that. The only right is what is after my constitution. And the only wrong, what is against it. A man is to carry himself in the presence of all opposition as if everything were titular and ephemeral, but he. You want to know the essence of self-reliance? It's right there, ladies and gentlemen. Emerson's extremism can be seen in this statement. If you believe no law can be sacred to me but that of my own nature, which is reflected in Henry David Thoreau, right? Civil disobedience. By the way, outside the story for a moment, Thoreau and Emerson knew each other. I'm going back inside the story. Then there is no hope for society. If you think that it's all about you, there's no hope for society because everyone's different. That is the nature of being human. And the rational side over us overrules our natures to come together and agree with each other to formulate societies. You have to be a rational animal to formulate society. Well, wolves aren't rational. No, no. You don't think? Of course they're not. They don't think. They just eat. They hunt and they eat. And we impose our own words like society, the wolf pack, right? Based on their behaviors. And while he's right to say good and bad are only names, did you read that, what we read? Dostoevsky's everything permitted idea. When you say that only right is what is after my constitution, you eliminate the possibility of having a society. Think about the last sentence. You should stand in front of all opposition as if it were ephemeral, meaning, short-lived, except you. Vapor. That word ephemeral means lasting for a short time. Is true of all human beings. We all only last a short time. A short time. Read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, if you doubt me. Virtues are, in popular estimate, rather the exception than the rule. There's the man and his virtues. Men do what is called good actions. Their works are done as an apology or extenuation of their living in the world, as invalids, and the insane pay a high board. The virtues are penances. I do not wish to expiate, but to live. Think about what he's writing here. These virtues are exceptions rather than rules. What is he talking about? He says that they are exceptions. Virtue is high. What are virtues? High moral standards. And depending on your point of view, there's 7, 4, whatever, more. For example, cardinal virtues. What are the cardinal virtues? Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Somebody wrote that on my blackboard. The cardinal virtues. They're virtues to be prudent, justice, or don't you believe in these virtues? They're considered the foundational, right, from classical philosophy that lead to other virtues. Don't forget what the golden mean was, a prudent man's viewpoint of what the golden mean is, right? Based on someone who's prudent, practical. A framework for morality and moral behavior, for living the good life. Don't forget our discussion on the golden mean. Emerson extremism shows itself by saying virtues are exceptions, not rules. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the chaos that would erupt if suddenly, well, who needs virtues? Who needs them? Who needs to be prudent? Who cares about, there's no such thing as justice, right? Think about this. Look around today. Or do or do you think there's virtues everywhere? Do you see virtues in actions, or do you see them being tossed aside, like Emerson's saying? So it's every man for himself. How sad is that? You might ask, why should you? Why can't I just treat virtues as Emerson says? They're an afterthought. Well, you could do that. but then that means that I can too. So where would we be then? If you don't believe in justice, well, neither do I. So here, take that. You see what I'm saying? That's crazy. You need rules. You do. You really do. It's not, and ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line, this story, Self-Reliance, it's all about you, but it's really not. Living is not just about you. Emerson says that when you do a good thing, you're doing it as a kind of a penance. Is that true? Do you believe that when you do something good, that it's penance, you're doing penance? What? What the heck does it mean? This is why it's important to carefully read these classes. Well, Jimmy, if this is all BS, why do you want me to read it? Well, because, not just because it's BS, because it is BS. You want to know BS. Because people do BS, don't they? Or do you believe everything you hear? Right? I know that for myself, it makes no difference whether I do or forbear those actions which I reckon excellent. I cannot consent to pay for a privilege where I have an intrinsic right. I cannot consent to pay for a privilege where I have an intrinsic right. Few and mean as gifts may be, I actually am, and I do not need my own assurance or the assurance of my fellows. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what people think. Emerson says here that it doesn't make a difference if he does or doesn't do excellent actions. For example, I cannot consent to pay for a privilege when I have an intrinsic right for that privilege. What's he talking about? Well, I agree with that, Jimmy. I don't. I have a right to be happy. I'm not going to pay to be happy. Really? Really? You don't pay to be happy? Really? Really? Let's take water. That's a good example rather than happiness. It's too deep to talk about happiness, but water, right? Water. Do you have a right to good water? Pope Francis in Laudato Si, which is encyclical letter, he uses 40,000 words, over 40,000, 4 times more than our friend Emerson, right? To invite a dialogue. And he said this among the 40,000 words, quote, access to safe drinkable water is a basic and universal human right, since it is essential to human survival and as such is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. This end quote. This mirrors exactly what Emerson is saying. He says, I'm not going to pay for what's my intrinsic right. Would you agree with that? I think that sums it up pretty well, right? He's not going to be paying for water. Fresh water is a right. Do we all have a right to fresh water? Well, it sounds like we do, right? Think again. Since when did access to water become a universal right? Don't tell me you don't pay for water. You pay for water, you get a water bill. Am I right? You buy bottled water, don't you? Am I right? We pay for water. In the past, people built their homes around water when they couldn't pump it to where they need to go, or they dug for a well. They need water. You need water, and you have to pay for it, whether through labor or money. There were rights for water, and sometimes you fought wars for water. There'll always be fights for water. Water is the most precious resource outside of time that we have. And it always will be, but it is not a right. You don't have a right to it. You need it, you want it, but you don't have a right to it, right? You need it to survive. Becomes part of our economic fabric, the economic fabric. Well, Jimmy, what the hell is that? Well, it's part of your economy, how you live. We live with currency, right? We pay for things. We don't just take things. We don't just barter things, although we do, eBay. We pay for things and we buy them and we sell them and we consume them. But do we have a right to it? Like we do have a right to happiness, but what makes you happy? I don't want to go there. Of course, a right is not a need. A need is not a right. It's not a right. You need it, you want it. The choice of words is why Pope's encyclical is confusing and why it is dangerous to simply read and believe Emerson. You have to think about him and what he says. He says that what we must do, all he must do, is all that concerns him. It's not about you, it's about me. I don't really care what people think. This sounds like a strong statement, right? I don't care what people think. Do you? It's not true. Well, you can understand not giving a who about what people think. Doing what you must do, if that's all that concerns you, is stupid. What do you mean, Jimmy? If I'm doing what I want to do, if I'm free to do what I want to do, of course you are. But what has that got to do with living and being and society? Huh? Imagine a world where we were going around doing only things that concern us. Can you imagine that? Holy, well, Jimmy, that sounds like the world we live in now. Could be. Could be. Could be. Great man is he who in the midst of a crowd keeps his perfect sweetness, the independence of solitude. The objection to conforming to usages that have become dead to you is that it scatters your force. It loses your time and blurs the impression of your character. But do your work, and I shall know you. This is an important passage that brings to us the important understanding of Emerson going over the top. Going over the top. He says that you lose time and your impressions of your character when you conform to dead usages. What are dead usages? The rules of society, right? Dead usages. It's passe to be on time. I'm going to work when I want to be working. I don't want to work when the boss tells me to come in. You see what I'm saying? What is Emerson talking about? He clarifies examples like a dead church, a dead Bible, right? A great part of government, the government. It's really stupid to listen to the government. Do you believe that? Well, we can talk about that another time. But is the Bible dead? You think the Bible's dead? He says you can tell who you are, right? You can't tell who you are when you are buried in all this usage and all this stuff. Who are you? Do your work and I'll know you. That sounds really beautiful. Do your work, I will know you. But are you known by but we are known by our work. Is that true? And that is the problem with Emerson. He mixes obvious truths with his extreme view on individuality. You are what you eat, and you are what you work at. That's undeniable, right? It's true. You are what you eat. What does that mean? Well, do you eat what you want? Well, I think everybody should eat what they want. I have a right to eat. Like Mr. Rob is a story about a guy who steals bread because he's got a right to, he's starving, right? I don't want to go there. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adorned by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. It is so bad then, is it so bad to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, Socrates, Jesus, Luther, Copernicus, Newton. To be great is to be misunderstood. This is one of the most quoted sentences from Emerson on the foolish consistency. He says consistency is not good. It's not good. It's not good. Consistency is a great soul that simply has nothing to do. He goes further and says that being misunderstood is actually a great thing. Is that true? Is that so? Then why read with Jimmy? Why do we even go on? Who gives it? Right? I don't want to. Who cares? To be, to be misunderstood. To be great is to be misunderstood. What the heck is he talking about? Humpty Dumpty. he and Alice were arguing in Through the Looking Glass, and Humpty says something about, well, there's glory for you. And Alice says, that glory doesn't mean that, whatever, Humpty was saying it means. He says, well, a word, glory means whatever I want it to mean. A word means whatever I want it to mean. And Alice counters that argument by saying, you cannot make words mean what you want them to mean. Can't do that. And Humpty counters that argument by saying, sure I can. Which is to be the master, me or the word? In that little segment, that little piece of Through the Looking Glass, whether you can make words mean what you want them to mean is the essence of communication. You understand that? Because if you can make words mean whatever you want them to mean, how the hell do you communicate? How do you communicate with people? Right? You got to agree on definitions. Aristotle said that. Don't forget the golden mean. And when he says too much consistency sounds like inflexibility, rigidity, etc., that's not really the right words. If you're not consistent, talk to a sports, an athlete about consistency, a golf pro, a baseball player, a writer, a worker. Talk to anybody about consistency, repeatability. If you're not consistent, you're erratic, you're unstable. You got to be careful of the words because you can see how tricky words can be. Don't forget Humpty Dumpty now. Emerson is talking, read what Emerson says here, right? Consistency with consistency, a great soul has nothing to do. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Of course he does. He has to practice at being consistent. Look at Michael Jordan, how many times he threw free throws every day, every day. We pass for what we are. Men imagine that they communicate their virtue or vice only by actions, overt actions, and do not see that virtue or vice emit a breath every moment. What the hell does that mean? What? What? Virtue and vice emit a breath every moment? Emerson is saying that our actions are not the only things that communicate their virtue, who we are. But wait a minute. Didn't he just say that virtue is not important? Virtues are not important? This guy's an elegant writer. His words flow effortlessly, don't they? But ladies and gentlemen, you have to be thinking about what you are reading. First he says virtues, now he's saying they're important, right? We reveal virtue. We reveal ourselves, not just through our actions, but admit a breath. What the hell is he talking about? I'm going to pause for a moment. We've been going a long time. I'm back. So let's continue, please. Okay, we first share the life by which things exist and afterwards see them as appearances in nature and forget that we have shared their cause. We lie in the lap of immense intelligence, which makes us receivers of its truth and organs of its activity. And when we discern justice, when we discern truth, we do nothing of ourselves but allow a passage to its beams. This is Emerson at his finest. What's he saying? Well, he says that when we're born, we share the life by which things exist. Sounds reasonable. In other words, we're part of nature, but then afterwards, we see them, these things, as appearances in nature. And we forget that we have shared their cause. In other words, we separate from nature. We become further and further away from what we were. And that's true to a large extent, isn't it? With all the distractions that come up from living with life. You can't go to a restaurant today and not see people with screens, right? They're always holding cell phones or iPads, even children. They don't talk to each other. He says that when you remember this, you have inspiration and wisdom. And what a beautiful line. We lie in the lap of immense intelligence. Boy, can you say that now, huh? But what is the intelligence that he's talking about? Note that he says when we discern justice and truth, we do nothing of ourselves but allow passage of its beams. The hell is that all about? That remember, he rejects virtues like justice and truth, saying that each person has his own. Remember, careful reading. Thoughtless people contradict as readily the statement of perceptions as of opinions. They do not distinguish between perception and notion. They fancy that I choose to see this or that thing. But perception is not whimsical. Perception is fatal. If I see a trait, my children will see it after me and in course of all mankind. Although it may chance that no one has seen it before me, for my perception of it, whatever he's looking at, is as much a fact as the sun. Emerson, the extremist, think about this. He's saying that he's talking about words, perception, notion, what he perceives, right? Maybe no one else has seen it, but once he does perceive it, everyone sees it. It's all about him. He accuses people of being thoughtless when they contradict perceptions or opinions. When they don't perceive what he perceives, it's a contradiction. You're contradicting it because it's not true. It's what I perceive. What? He introduces the word notion as being different than a perception. But a notion is a conception or a belief about something. Huh? A notion is a vague or general idea based on impulse. Perception is becoming aware of something through your senses, or the way you interpret that information. And if you think about it, they are really the same thing. A notion, perception. You say potato, I say patata. Here's why. While Emerson likes to slice the word into perception or notions, if one were pure truth and the other opinion, unfortunately, real life doesn't work that way. When I perceive something, okay, let's just talk about this for a moment. I perceive something, whether it's freedom in an act that I see, or the color red when I'm looking at something. I'm not assessing some untouched reality, am I? I'm matching a private experience to a public idea. Think about this. Take the color red. My perception of red and your perception of red might be entirely different, and they are, and I'll tell you why, because I'm colorblind. So my red is not your red. I can't see red. And yet, we both speak of the same underlying thing. Let's look at a rose. When talking about red, which is a wavelength, you can measure red. It's a wavelength, just like X-rays are a wavelength. You don't see an X-ray, but when you get your tooth X-rayed, you get a picture of it now on the computer. They used to have to develop it, right? But you get a picture instantaneously, a digital reading of that because they took an X-ray, but you didn't feel anything or see anything. But the doctor left the room and they covered you with, right, that cover so you don't get that X-ray into your body, just your mouth. So what does that tell me? Well, it tells us that perceptions and notions are not two separate things, but they're just one. The world as it exists outside of us. The raw sensation, whatever I see, and the concept that I use to name it, red, justice, freedom, etc. You can't separate them. I call these words are what the things that I call. I label them. And like Humpty Dumpty said, you and I have to agree on what red is. Not just the nanometers, right? The wavelength, the size of the wavelength, but you and have the color. But I don't see what you see and you don't see what I see, but I can't impose because I don't see it. And unless I learned that other people see red, how would I know? I would try to be imposing that my red is your red, and it's not, and your red is not my red because it's not. Is there a universal red? Yeah, 700 nanometers, the wavelength. That's the real red. Well, how the hell do you know that? Your eye doesn't carry a ruler in it, right? But in any case, Emerson's mistake is thinking perception stands alone, that it's all about your perception. But it never stands alone. Perception is shaped by notions, and all notions point back to something real, something perceptions. It's all mixed up, right? They work together or they don't work at all. You understand that? So when he says perception is as much a fact as the sun, it sounds beautiful, but so what? What's the point? What's the point? The point is basically he's saying your perceptions matter more than anyone else's, which is simply not true. It is true, but it's not true. Emerson, this is Emerson as confuser in chief. Is an acorn better than an oak? Is the parent better than the child? Whence then the worship of the past? The centuries are conspirators towards the sanity and authority of the soul. Time and space are but physiological colors. He's saying that the past and of our histories are conspirators against sanity, and it's a beautiful language, but meaningless, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard that if you don't remember the mistakes of the past, you're bound to repeat them, right? He tries to be Einstein when he says time and space are but physiological colors which the eye makes, but the soul is light. Where it is, the day was, and where it's not, it's night. He's a kind of a poet. But time and space have no color, do they? Do they? If you got a good imagination, maybe, but they don't. So what the hell is he talking about? This is what Jimmy means when he tells you you have to read guys like this to get a sense of where you are as an individual. He's to a large degree sometimes called a silver-tongued devil. That's what they call guys like this, silver-tongued devils. Discontent is the want of self-reliance. It is the infirmity of will. Discontent. What's interesting about this statement is that when you are discontented, he's saying you don't have self-reliance. You don't have willpower. He's talking about regret. Do you have regrets? What are regrets? Well, they're feelings of disappointment, sadness, losing an opportunity. You might have a regret. Spending time with your family, not enough. That's a regret. Maybe. Emerson depends on your family. Emerson's advice, well, if you can help the sufferer, good. If not, get along with your own work. Already the evil begins to be repaired. Don't worry about it. He considers regrets evil, and he considers work therapy, which isn't bad in itself. What do you regret? Do you regret anything? What do you do about your regrets? What's it going to do you to regret? So, in a way, he's right. There's a theory that if you change one thing, you change everything. So, if you did what you regretted not doing, you probably wouldn't be here now. It would change the course of your life. You know that, right? So he's right. You don't want regrets. You just want to live. But that's the point of this essay. What does that mean to live, to know yourself? Traveling is a fool's paradise. What does that mean? My giant goes wherever I go. Now, you can't outrun yourself. You think the grass is greener? It's not. You can't escape who you are by changing locations. Oh, does that mean you don't want to travel, Jimmy? No, traveling's fine. But why do people travel? Why? Oh, it's beautiful in Greece. I can't tell you how many times I hear that. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Problems or sense of self are carried with you. That doesn't make sense. Maybe it does to you. Insist on yourself and never imitate. Every great man is unique. Right? We're all unique, so we're all great. This is a confusing piece. You can read it on your own. Pause me and read it. It actually really is arrogant. Why do you read the classics, for example, to learn how others lead their lives? And Emerson is against this. He's telling us Shakespeare didn't have any teachers or masters. Well, of course he did. Great writers, classical writers like painters, they imitate others as a fundamental part of their development. You don't just wake up, unless you're Mozart, and do great things, right? Do great music, do great things. Or do you? Do you wake up and just do great things all the time? What is a great thing? Is writing original music great, or is in fact just taking out the garbage great? Look, is that getting the mail in the morning? This imitation is not about copying or plagiarism, but about deep study, which helps artists absorb techniques in their own voice. Every great man is unique. Notice the article "a" in front of unique is a unique. You see that? He doesn't call him unique, he calls him a unique. He uses unique as a noun. And if you ask Google, we're told the primary difference between using a in front of unique, every man is unique, is grammatically correct. No, it's not. This is not incorrect grammar. Remember, he's using these words because he thought them through. Google, in this case, is incorrect. Emerson means exactly what he wrote, is a unique. From all words he used in this essay, he is a careful writer. You are a unique. Would you rather be a boy or the boy? You see how articles mean things? Society never advances, blah, blah, blah. For everything that is given, something is taken. Emerson doesn't believe that we are advancing. His paragraph here puts naked New Zealanders above thinking Americans. Is he against scientific advances? Well, maybe. Depends on your point of view. Think about multiplication tables. I used to have to memorize them in grade school, right? Nobody does that anymore. You got calculators, your phones in your pocket, give you access to pretty much anything you like. A question, ask Siri, right? So in a way, Emerson is right. We lose something when we gain something, which is like chess. In chess, every move you gain something and lose something, and you want to gain more advantages to checkmate the king. Which is why making your decisions, like reading this essay, is so important. It brings out important information for you to make your own decisions. Because you will lose something every time you gain something. You're going to lose time in reading this analysis with me, but you're also going to gain something. I think you will gain something. I'm certainly spending a lot of energy telling you these things. And I don't think I'm wasting my time. I'm giving you the benefit of what I've studied and what I've thought about for many, many, many years. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, had a doctrine of opposites. He said that everything lives in tension. Where there's up, there's down. Where there's hot, there's cold. There's life, death. Each concept requires the other to have a meaning. In other words, nothing can be gained without something giving something up. You can't define a yes unless you define a no. You can't define a one unless you know a zero. The Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, to choose one thing is to renounce another. Every action carries an opportunity cost. If you marry one person, you lose all other possible marriages. If you pick a career, you lose alternative paths. Jimmy was fortunate he had more than one career. You must consider what you lose when you gain. Isn't that the truth? Buddhism teaches us, right? Attachment brings a loss, and loss creates conditions for a new gain. It's less cycle. In other words, nothing is gained without losing or dying. This is difficult to understand. People think loss is bad, but loss brings clarity, gets rid of illusions. When I was fired, right? Brought instant reality into my head, into me, changed my life. Gain is like that too, since we think gain is good. Maybe not weight is good. But gaining something costs you something, like time, relationships. which is why I wanted you to read Emerson, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And for you to decide to help you think clearly. Here's the next paragraph. The civilized man has built a coach, but has lost the use of his feet. Society is a wave. The person who wakes up a nation today, next year die, and their experiences with them. What is he talking about when he says society is a wave? Well, do you watch waves in the ocean? Because scientifically, Emerson is right. Water doesn't move. The water particles move in a circular or arbiter's motion. So a wave is a transfer of energy, not the water. Think about a cork. Cork is floating, right? The wave passes it, it bobs up and down, moves slightly forward and then back, and returns close to its starting point. You can see this in the ocean if you walk along the shore in the ocean and look at the ocean, what it does to the sand beneath the water. What waves do to the sand, right? The sand, they roll the sand up the beach over time and they move it back out again. So he's saying society doesn't move forward. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Well, people comprise society. He's sort of bemoaning the fact that the human condition, and he's got a point. People haven't changed that much, have they? Have they? They're selfish, they're happy, they're greedy. So what does change? Well, technology changes. Social media changed us, didn't it? Of course it has. It changed our behavior, but it hasn't changed our core characteristics. There's still bullies, there's still things, right? Most men gamble with her and gain all. Who's her? Fortune, luck, chance. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring. This is the last paragraph of his essay. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. People pull this out and quote it all the time, right? But put it in this context where he's writing about fortune. He's saying most men gamble with fortune and they gain all or they lose all, right? And you can read Machiavelli on this website to talk about fortune and how fortune really plays a role with all of us. But you don't want to leave everything to fortune, to luck. You don't want to leave everything to chance. You got to do a certain amount of this stuff yourself. Self-reliance. If you eliminate fortune when you decide things, then you shall sit hereafter out of fear from her rotations. But is it you who is deciding this? Remember our discussion about a blackboard, right? In other words, you eliminate fortune when you decide things. If you think you decide something, is it really you deciding it? What do you think you think you think, right? Emerson believes that when you decide for yourself, it won't matter what fortune deals you. Well, of course it will, because you might decide this, but then fortune slaps you right in the face, right? It certainly slapped me some. It slapped me sometimes. The good things that come your way, you think the good days are preparing for you, but Emerson says, don't believe it. And then he ends with his famous sentences. In other words, it's up to you, not fortune, fate, or whatever you want to call it. Is Emerson right? It's up to you that you can dodge your fate, your fortune, change, chance. What is free will anyway? What the hell is he talking about? I told you reading Emerson would challenge your thinking, didn't I? And I hope it did. I hope this analysis did, or not. And I know I lost some of you in this analysis. Oh, Jimmy, it's way too long. I know I lost some of you, but the people I didn't lose, I bet you. Email me, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. I'll bet you gained something, didn't you? You lost some time, but I think you invested the time very wisely. You can always come back too. And for those who stayed, I hope I brought you that point that it's really self-reliance is very important, but not to the extreme. It's not just about you. A lot of the words tell you to rely on yourself, but relying on yourself is only half the battle, ladies and gentlemen. Here's John Donne. John Donne is a very famous English poet. Loved, one of my favorites. I think we're going to read some John Donne on this website. No man is an island. No man is an island entirely of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And if a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as the promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or thy own were. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Emerson's essay has sought to challenge you on thinking about not only who you are, but what you are and how you became or become who and what you are. And isn't that the purpose of classical literature? Thank you for being here with me, and I look forward to our next visit with Jimmy. Learn more about the classics by watching our ongoing videos of novels, essays, plays, stories on this website or on this YouTube channel where you're at now. And be sure to visit and read other analysis with me, with Jimmy, on this website. And remember, questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, praises, email Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Go out and rely on yourself, but be careful. Don't do it too strongly. But you are important. Don't let anybody tell you you're not. Take it easy.